On June 18, 2020, a German company admitted that 1.9 billion euros, money that was supposed to be sitting in bank accounts in the Philippines, did not exist. Not stolen, not lost, never existed. 2 days later, the company's chief operating officer got on a private plane in Austria. He has not been seen since. This is the story of Wirecard, Germany's greatest financial disaster and one of the strangest disappearances in modern corporate history. To understand how big this was, you have to understand what Wirecard meant to Germany. Germany builds things, cars, machines, chemicals. What Germany did not have was a tech giant. No German Google, no German Amazon. While Silicon Valley printed billionaires, Germany watched. Then came Wirecard. Wirecard processed payments. Every time someone tapped a card online, a company like Wirecard sat invisibly in the middle, moving the money and taking a small cut. Boring work, enormous scale. And Wirecard grew fast, from a small Munich payment processor into a global operation spanning Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. In 2018, it happened. Wirecard was added to the DAX, Germany's index of its 30 most important companies. It replaced Commerzbank, a bank founded in 1870. At its peak, Wirecard was worth more than Deutsche Bank. Germany finally had its tech champion, and nobody wanted to hear otherwise. Remember that last part. It matters more than anything else in this story. Not everyone was cheering. At the Financial Times in London, a journalist named Dan McCrum had been looking at Wirecard's numbers since 2015, and they didn't make sense. The problem was Wirecard's structure. A huge portion of its business ran through what it called third-party partners, outside companies in places like Dubai, Singapore, and the Philippines that supposedly processed payments on Wirecard's behalf. The profits from these partners were spectacular. The evidence they were real was thin. McCrum published, then published again. Former employees came forward, documents leaked. An internal investigation in Singapore raised red flags. Here is where the story stops being a normal fraud story. Wirecard did not just deny it. Wirecard went on the attack. Journalists investigating the company found themselves being investigated, followed, their communications targeted. Wirecard hired private investigators and pushed a story that this was all a conspiracy. Short sellers and reporters working together to destroy a great German company. And the incredible part? People believed it. In February 2019, Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, did something it had never done for a single company. It banned short selling of Wirecard stock. It launched an investigation, not into Wirecard, into the journalists and the short sellers. Germany's financial watchdog looked at a company accused of fraud and a newspaper reporting the fraud, and decided the newspaper was the problem. By 2019, the pressure was too much to ignore. Wirecard agreed to a special audit, brought in KPMG to prove once and for all that the critics were wrong. Wirecard's shareholders celebrated. Finally, vindication. The audit took 6 months, and KPMG could not verify the third-party business. Not because the money looked suspicious, because Wirecard could not produce the documents. Still, the company held on. There was one last line of defense. 1.9 billion euros sitting in escrow accounts at 2 banks in the Philippines. Real money, real accounts, proof the business was real. In June 2020, the auditors did the obvious thing. They wrote to the Philippine banks and asked for confirmation. The banks wrote back. There were no accounts. There never had been. The documents Wirecard had shown its auditors were fake. On June 18th, Wirecard admitted the money likely did not exist. The stock lost more than 90% of its value in days. On June 25th, 1 week later, Wirecard filed for insolvency, the first company in DAX history to do so. CEO Markus Braun was arrested. He later stood trial in Munich. But the COO, the man who ran the Asian operations where all the missing money supposedly lived, was already gone. To colleagues, Marsalek was Wirecard's dealmaker, the Austrian executive who handled the parts of the business nobody else understood, in countries nobody else visited. To investigators, he was something else entirely. After his disappearance, reporting revealed Marsalek had spent years cultivating an entirely separate life. Contacts in intelligence circles, interest in Libya, in Russia, in private military operations. He had allegedly obtained and shared classified documents. He moved through worlds that had nothing to do with payment processing. On June 19, 2020, he flew to Belarus. From there, investigators believe he traveled to Moscow, where reporting suggests he has been living under a false identity, allegedly under the protection of Russian intelligence. He remains one of Europe's most wanted men. As of today, he has never been caught. It's tempting to file Wirecard away as another corporate fraud. Big number, bad executives, prison sentences. But that misses what made it possible. Wirecard did not survive for years because the fraud was clever. It survived because everyone whose job was to catch it had a reason not to look. The auditors signed off year after year on a business they couldn't verify. The regulator went after the messengers instead of the message. Investors didn't want the story to be true. Germany's tech champion couldn't be a fraud. Politicians had promoted the company abroad. The evidence was public. Journalists published it repeatedly. It changed nothing for 5 years. That's the uncomfortable part. Fraud this large doesn't hide from the system. It hides inside it. 19 billion euros of shareholder value gone. Thousands of jobs, and a man who walked onto a plane in 2020 and never came back. The money never existed. The question worth asking is how many people knew and kept quiet anyway.
Here's what gets me about Wirecard. Every fraud story I cover ends the same way. Someone points at the problem years before it explodes, and the system decides the person pointing is the threat. Madoff had Harry Markopoulos. Wirecard had Dan McCrum. Nobody listened, both times. If you want more stories like this, the collapses, the cover-ups, and the people who saw it coming, subscribe. I put out one every couple of weeks, and there are a lot of these left to tell. And if you haven't seen how one man ran the biggest Ponzi scheme in history for 20 years without anyone stopping him, that one's next.